Today, we are tackling a really big question in education. Why does so much teacher training feel like a total waste of time? You know, we've all been there. You go to a one-day workshop, and by Monday, it's like it never even happened. But you know what? The research points to a much, much better way. So, in this explainer, we're going to deconstruct that old broken model and lay out a new blueprint for teacher growth that actually changes how we teach and what our students learn.
All right, here's our game plan. First, we'll look at the problem, that one-shot workshop. Then we'll build the solution, which is a true learning ecosystem. We're going to stress test this whole model with a really complex challenge, see how it plays out in the real world, and then wrap up with a pretty radical idea for how we should be investing our money. Ready? Let's jump in.
Okay, first up, the broken workshop model. You can think of this as the villain of our story, that all too familiar and, let's be honest, often frustrating one-day training session.
I think pretty much every educator can relate to this, right? You spend a whole day learning some new strategy, you get the fancy binder, you feel all inspired, and then you walk back into your classroom on Monday morning and reality hits. That binder, it just gathers dust on a shelf, and nothing really changes. Well, that feeling isn't just in your head, it's a well-documented failure of the whole design.
So here's the fundamental problem. The old workshop model is all about transmitting knowledge, just pouring information into people's heads. But the real goal should be to change practice. The old way is passive, it's a one-off event, and it leads to really low impact and, frankly, a lot of cynicism from teachers who've seen it all before. The alternative? An ecosystem model. This is active, it's sustained over time, and it's embedded right into a teacher's daily work. And that is what leads to real change and long-term success.
So if the workshop model is broken, what's the fix? Well, it's not about finding a better workshop. It's about building a real, living learning ecosystem, one that rests on two incredibly powerful, evidence-based pillars.
Now, here's a number that might actually shock you. The research is pretty clear on this. For professional development to create significant, lasting change, both in a teacher's skills and in student outcomes, it takes more than 80 hours of sustained work. A single 6-hour workshop, it doesn't even begin to scratch the surface.
So the big question is how in the world do you get to over 80 hours of high-quality learning? It's not by cramming more workshops into the calendar. You do it by building two key structures right into the school year: one-on-one instructional coaching and team-based professional learning communities, or PLCs.
And it's really important to see how these two pillars work together. They do different but equally essential jobs. Instructional coaching is all about fidelity, making sure that a new teaching strategy is being used correctly day in and day out. A coach is right there with the teacher, helping turn theory into practice. PLCs, on the other hand, are the engine for sustainability. They create that permanent team structure where teachers can look at student work together, solve problems, and make sure these new practices stick around for good.
Okay, to really see the power of this ecosystem, we need to put it to the test, a stress test. So let's apply it to one of the most complex, demanding shifts in education right now, the move to structured literacy. This is that super explicit, systematic way of teaching reading that's grounded in what we call the science of reading.
Just to get started, to even begin to understand the deep theory behind structured literacy, all the phonology, the morphology, teachers need some seriously intensive training. We're talking about programs that involve over 160 hours of advanced coursework, and that's just to build the foundational knowledge.
And this is the million-dollar question, isn't it? Let's say a district invests all that time and money to give every teacher 160 hours of amazing training. Is that enough to actually change how reading is taught in the classroom? Well, the research has a surprisingly clear and simple answer.
And here it is. The data on this is just stunning. All that intensive knowledge training, by itself, it has minimal to no impact on what teachers actually do in their classrooms or on student reading scores. Nothing. It's a dead end. But, and this is the game changer, when you combine that same training with sustained in-classroom coaching, the impact on both teacher practice and student outcomes becomes truly significant. Coaching isn't just a nice add-on, it is the one thing that makes all the difference.
Now, I know what you might be thinking. This all sounds great in a perfect world, but does it actually work in places with huge challenges, like massive class sizes and really limited resources? Well, let's take a look at a case study from the Philippines to see how these ideas hold up on the ground.
So research on teacher attitudes there shows this really interesting split.
When you ask them about the why of new systems, they're all in. They're positive, they see their students have diverse needs, and they want better ways to help them. But when it comes to the how, they get really wary and anxious. They're worried about being asked to do more and implement complex new things without the training, time, or support they need to actually succeed.
And we have to understand this point. This is not teachers resisting change. Not at all. It is a completely rational response from professionals who have been handed big new mandates time and time again with zero support to make them work. If you want buy-in, you have to build a system that directly addresses these very logical fears with real, sustained support.
And that brings us to our final and maybe most important point. If we know what actually works, the sustained ecosystem of coaching and collaboration, then we have to fundamentally change how we budget. It is time to start investing in people, not in one-off events.
So, take a look at a typical school district's budget for professional development. What's absolutely startling is that the vast majority of the money, often as much as 80%, goes towards those one-off events and external speakers. You know, the very things we've just seen have the lowest impact on practice.
So what does a smarter budget look like? Well, an evidence-based approach completely flips this on its head. The bulk of the investment goes into people, funding a team of in-house instructional coaches. And it goes into time, paying for things like substitutes so that teacher teams have protected, collaborative time to work together.
So the big takeaway here is really clear. We have got to shift our investment. We need to move away from one-off events and external experts and toward in-house coaches and protected time for our teachers. And we need to get away from thinking about a calendar of training and start making a real, multi-year commitment to professional growth. So, the final question for all of us is this. How can we move our own schools from being stuck in a calendar of events to building a true, thriving learning ecosystem? The choice is pretty clear, and the answer is going to define the future of teaching and of learning. Thanks for joining me for this explainer.